35 years ago, an A-list Bollywood star invested his time, talent and finances to create a uniquely gut-wrenching love story. Junoon, produced by Shashi Kapoor and directed by Shyam Benegal, was set against the 1857 revolt. Shashi Kapoor played Javed Khan, a proud Pathan, who in the midst of bloodshed and violence becomes obsessed with the virginal British beauty Ruth, played by Nafisa Ali. Based on the Ruskin-born novella A Flight of Pigeons, Junoon had sweep, power and emotional heft. At the recently concluded Mumbai Film Festival, director Imtiaz Ali presented a restored version of the film. Here are excerpts of the conversation between Imtiaz, Shyam Benegal, Nafisa Ali, Naseeruddin Shah, Govind Nihalani, who was the cinematographer on the film, and Kunal Kapoor, who is hoping to also restore the other wonderful films his father produced. Kunal also played a small role in Junoon.
I don't know where to start. I have no idea.
From the beginning.
From the beginning.
Let me start with the how this film came to be. There was a long short story that Ruskin Bond had written for a magazine that used to be published at that time. I mean, it's so many years ago that I've even forgotten the name of the magazine.
Imprint, I think.
No, was it Imprint?
Esquire.
Yeah, no, Imprint.
Imprint.
It was Imprint. Way back in 76 or 77. And I was much taken by that story. And of course, I asked Ruskin if he would part with the rights of the story, which he did. And he was paid a pathetic little sum of money, which he at that time accepted and later on resented. I don't blame him for that, because you see, originally when we had planned to make the film, I was thinking of a budget that was much smaller than what it eventually became. Because at that time I wasn't thinking that it would be Shashi Kapoor who would be producing the film. Okay. Even after he decided to produce the film, the kind of budget I gave to him made him laugh. You know, that whether it would be possible to make a film like, that kind of money. Anyway, so once one got the story, then it helped me to research the subject, and therefore 1857 events that took place in Shahjahanpur, where the main story took place. And the whole Shahjahanpur thing was available in imperial gazetteers. You know, there are imperial gazetteers, they used to be, year after year. And that was something that the British colonial government did, was to record a whole lot of events of the year in different states and different districts. So I went looking for Shahjahanpur and then found details of this particular story.
Okay.
It all starts with the church massacre.
Right.
And that particular church, which we used in the film, which was a church in Lucknow cantonment.
Right.
But actually, that church, the architecture of that church was done by a particular colonial architect who built churches like that all over UP. So the Shahjahanpur church, which I saw, was very like the church in Lucknow. And so when I chose to shoot in Lucknow, it was only for a matter of convenience. You know, some of the things, the dramatic elements had been changed around a bit to suit the story.
Sure.
But practically, most of the incidents that he referred to were actually historical incidents that took place in that. You know, it's a kind of, what's the word? It's history, not the normal kind of history you read about big kings and queens and stuff like that. It was the history of a place, of smaller people. Right. So it was wonderful to, and I think he had also consulted gazetteers to come to that. Right. But also, I think the story was popularly told in Anglo-Indian circles.
Right.
You know, so that was another
he was privy to
way it happened, yes. But when you do a period film, it's a huge problem because you have to, and particularly if you're not just shooting on sets.
Right.
We were shooting on actual locations.
Right.
Because we did have great locations, like, whether it was the Kakori and places like that. Right. Because one incident I must mention to you, when I was looking for locations, I remember traveling around, We went to a place called Kakori.
Yes.
You know the famous
Yes,
Kakori,
Kakori,
conspiracy
massacre.
case, etc.
Yes.
But Kakori was one of the scenes of battle in 1857. And we went down the street, and I said, this is absolutely perfect. Met an old lady. And this lady took me to her house, and she seriously started to say, you can see on that kitchen wall, these bullet holes there. I said, yeah. So that's from 1857.
Wow.
Because nothing had changed.
Okay.
So that gave me enough confidence that we could shoot a film of that period because very little had changed in most of those places, So it was extraordinary.
And you
And
thought that
that-
Kakuri was good only for kebabs.
Yeah, it was.
It's the same place, incidentally.
Yeah. When we decided to make the film, then it was, and then of course it was not too difficult to cast the film.
Okay.
So it
Let
was.
me bring in Mr. Naseeruddin Shah into the conversation at this point of casting. So, what was going on in your life, and what was the approach that was made, and what was your first impression of this film when it was told to you?
I was just too excited because I'd seen a number of period films as a kid, and it was my dream always to buckle a sword onto my belt and ride around on a horse, cutting down people like chaff. And I got to do that. And in terms of a role, it was just a magnificent part.
Absolutely.
And also, the money didn't hurt. And it was all generally very, very exciting for me to be a part of this thing.
And how did you find Miss Ali?
We were looking for someone for that particular Ruth, the girl who caused all the trouble. So to get somebody to play Ruth, who's a teenager and who's abducted by this Pathan. And I'd seen several people, from Calcutta, all over the place. And then finally, suddenly, I really can't remember, maybe Nafisa remembers that, yes, Kunal, yes. Kunal found her.
Really?
Yeah.
How was that?
We all swam at Beach Candy.
In a swimming costume.
She, Jennifer, Kunal.
Nafisa was a national swimmer at the time, and so was my brother. And it was the swimming fraternity in Beach Candy, and that's where I met her. And I said, I know they're looking. Dad's making a film, and are you interested? And that's when I mentioned it to Dad, and Dad said, well, talk to Shyam and introduce it to Shyam. So we did, and I can't remember, was it the Shamiana or the coffee shop that we went and we had lunch, and I introduced the two of them together and then left. The next thing I know, she's doing it.
Wow. How did you figure that she would be good for the part and she'd be...
Well, first of all, the first thing, of course, was she looked right.
Right.
Second, of course, that she didn't know how to speak Hindi, which was a qualification in this case. So there were a few things like that which worked out very well. But the fact is that she fit the role perfectly.
That's true.
Absolutely, and that was the main thing. And then, so you see, I was very happy with the way the film eventually got cast.
Right.
The actors, everybody fitted their roles so well. And this, I think, was part of it is accidental, like you must know as a director as well, that these things happen. But by and large, I think there's some sixth sense that prevails in people when you say this person is going to be right for the role. And when it came to Nafisa, it was exactly like that. Because she was a national champ, she was a swimming champ at that time. And she was, some people said, but isn't she a little too athletic? So I said, it doesn't really worry me that she's athletic, which came in very useful, by the way. When we were doing one particular sequence in the film, she belongs to this family and her house is up in flames and then she's running back home.
Oh, yes.
And there's these
Oh, the horses.
horsemen and these horses galloping across. And these were guys from the 61st Cavalry. And they were riding their horses. They were going very fast. And I made a cardinal mistake of calling her,
Oh.
a little after I allowed the horses to run.
Oh.
And then she started, I didn't realize, I thought she would be very ladylike and come very gently. But she started to sprint like a, and then she was absolutely, she was going to be hit by these horses were galloping.
But you
Luckily,
said that.
she beat the horses.
Wow.
She went ahead of the horses. And my God, her mother would have killed me, but she was there. She was absolutely shattered by this thing. I said, is this how you guys make movies? That's crazy. So, but anyway, that was it. And then I knew that she was right for the film.
Narsi Saab, were you meeting a lot of people to prepare for this one? Anyone special you might have met? Any special place you might have gone?
No, actually, I accompanied Shyam and Govind on their location hunting because I'm from UP and
Yes.
they wanted to visit Meerut and so on.
So you would have been the guide for
I
them,
tagged
I think.
along. Well, yeah, I was sort of, it was a jaunt for me really. I read the story. I don't claim I read any history about the mutiny or anything, because I believe that whatever information an actor needs is already there in the script. And doing the extra study does no harm, but I think that basically you should draw whatever you need from the script. And my great-great-grandfather came from Afghanistan around 1850 and fought in the mutiny for the British. We have portraits of him at home and so on. So I tried modeling myself on what he looked and tried to sort of, invoke his spirit within me. And
Can you just elaborate that for some of us who might be more interested in what you could get from this portrait as an actor, just from a portrait?
firstly, I'd been seeing this portrait as a child. It's one of him dressed in pretty grand robes, and he's holding a sword, and he has this enormous turban on his head and a very long beard. I can't see any resemblance with myself. Firstly, it's not a photograph, it's a portrait. But one had heard all sorts of stories about him when we were children. A lot of them, of course, I discovered later were pure fantasy. They were invented by the family to tell us about how brave he was and this and that. It was only later I discovered that he was in fact a person who aided the British. He left Afghanistan for the same reason. So now Sarfaraz is not that kind of a person.
At all.
At all. So I just tried to put myself on the opposite side using him as a model. And Shyam showed me a photograph of a group of people. And he pointed to one particular person in that group who was sitting on the ground like this, covered in a sort of a shawl, very gaunt sort of a person. Which surprised me because I thought I was going to play this magnificent guy, going around killing the Englishmen and so on. And when he showed me this photograph, I was a little bit disconcerted because I said, hey, this is not how I had imagined it to be. This guy, looks like a Khansama or something. But then that was a clue to me to not try to play it larger than life. A trap I fell into nevertheless.
You think so, sir? Because at that time we were only hearing praise about your acting in the movie.
Yeah, I did the most shouting, that's why. In our country, shouting and crying is mistaken for good acting. So I tried a little harder than I should have. I have to admit, all that wasn't quite necessary.
I want to tell you about my Ruth's character.
Yes, please.
When I went, Shyam said, okay, now come to my office and try on this dress. It's designed by Jennifer, my white dress. And I put it on. And I just felt, my God, this is just, whoever she is just me. I felt so at ease. I'm very nervous in real life, but I felt so at ease. And Shyam put me in front of the camera and he said, now turn left and turn right and turn left and right. I said, thank you. I said, that's it? He says, yeah. I said, oh, this is a very good director. He knows his work. And that's how Junoon was my film.
And you didn't have a
Didn't
read
ask
any
me to do
line
anything,
or
didn't ask me
nothing.
to act. In fact, he was so petrified that I would act. After I did my first shot, he would say, okay. I was like a one-take girl. And once I remember during the week, we had to run, Kulbhushan and I, from the Angrez
Ji.
on the galloping soldiers under a bridge. And Shyam and all the cameras, everything set up, and then we all arrived there. It was full of shit. It's floating shit. And Kulbhushan and I said, oh my God, what are we going to do? So I said, no, I have a role to play. I have to be, I'm worried about my life. Come on, Kulbhushan, let's go through the shit. And we just went.
Super.
I'll never forget that ever. Oh my God.
Right.
And Shashi as a producer, I think he's been, and Jennifer, I adore them. I adore everyone, but he was the most gracious, magnanimous, caring, cultured, intellectual producer, because we were always all together, sitting, laughing, joking, getting into our roles. And that era, I think, is missing a little bit sometimes, because it's a wonderful way to make films, to absorb the whole family, make a family. Because when we go home, everybody's on their own. But when we are all together, it's at least for me, it's magical, and it's remained with me 35 years later. That same magic remains with me.
So Govindji, now that you were doing a film which was of a larger scale, was there any special preparation for this one?
Not really. The preparation was on the aesthetic side, in the sense that that was the period where there was no electricity.
Okay.
There was no electricity. So the sources of lights were always these lamps or mashals or daylight.
So
or
how did
whatever.
you measure that?
No, we just, whatever scenes were shot at night, the source of light was maintained, the real diyas or the shamas or whatever you call them. And we created the atmosphere because of that. And I love that, because I like dramatic lighting, I like low-key lighting very much.
Right.
Eating the meal in the family
Ji.
is one of my favorite scenes, because it had to be lit with the candles. You know,
Right.
that was the source of light.
Wow.
And I was very happy when I recently I corrected the same scene
Right.
digitally, and I think it came out quite well.
But it was really a wild card entry for Shashi Kapoor, the matinee idol, to suddenly turn producer and want to make movies like the ones that you gentlemen have directed. How was it? How did it happen?
Well, it's a particular time in history, I think. One of the things is that that particular period, mid-70s, late 70s, and into the 80s, was a time when a lot of people were very idealistic about the medium. You thought that you have to make a film that is, apart from everything else, also is a work of some aesthetic significance. So that was an ambition that a lot of people had at that time. That particular ambition I don't think seriously exists now, except for among younger filmmakers, like you, for instance, and several others, young people. But by and large, that way of looking at a film, I don't think necessarily exists. Because, even the marketplace has become quite different in that sense. Because the manner in which films are made, shown, all that sort of thing, is also changed quite a lot. At that time, Shashi Kapoor was the reigning star, right? And he suddenly decided that he was going to produce films, but of the kind of things that he himself liked. I mean, he produced this, he produced Kalyug, he produced, the 36 Jaurangi Lane and so on. What happened was at that time, which was in some ways, it was a very interesting time, because otherwise I don't think I would have got the kind of opportunities I did to make the kind of films I did. Or to think about concentrating on making films rather than worry about whether it's going to work in the marketplace or not.
Right.
You know, that whole period, particularly in the 1970s and 80s, was a time of that kind. Now, today, you know, young people today who come into films don't have that, you know, because the world has changed quite a lot for them.
Right.
You know, it is not the same sort of situation. So I think there is a slight difference in the way people approach cinema today. At that time, we were not, you know, when you wanted to make a film, you wanted to make a film. You didn't seriously didn't need to play kind of political games with people with money, you know, producers. You didn't have to do that kind of thing. There was that's why I think there was a certain kind of idealism there. When I look at the film now and films of that period, particularly now Junoon, when I look at it, I just think, you know, if one was to make a film like this today, what would it take? You know, it would be a completely different kind of experience. But at that time, it was, for myself, it was like going back and reliving a part of history.
Right, sir.
You know, so because when we were shooting, I certainly, I don't know whether Nasir used to feel like that, but I certainly used to feel that we are in 1857, 1858.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
You know, it seemed like that. We always felt like that. You know, even the calls, you know, I mean, street calls used to seem like it was from that period. You know, it was quite extraordinary. And there's a great Exodus scene towards the end.
Right.
And that Exodus scene, today, if you have to do something like this, it would be so difficult, so difficult.
But what Shyam is saying about all of us living in that era, I completely am in agreement with. Because as it is, I live in my head a great deal of the time. And to be there in a place like Malihabad or Kakori and to be dressed like that, and I would make it a point to dress up in my costume every day and stay in costume, whether I was shooting or not. And so it was very easy for me to transport myself to that era. And in any case, everybody in Kakori and Malihabad was talking about 1857 as if it happened yesterday.
Correct.
And they've been talking about it, they've probably been talking about the shooting since. And they'll talk about it for the next 100 years.
They
But
talk
it-
so well in those
very,
areas.
very terrifying. I mean, I came there, was only the end of the shoot for a week. I didn't know Nasir at all, but I mean, I knew Nasir as the actor of, you know, Manthan and Shyam's earlier films, and I thought he was a very exciting actor, and I thought his whole ensemble was very exciting for me to come there. But I mean, he was a terrifying presence. You didn't want to be around too close with him, and partly in his get-up.
His fiery eyes.
So Kunal, was this the first movie that he produced?
Yeah. Wow. It was. I mean, I remember my last years in school, and every morning these breakfast table conversations. Dad always had breakfast with us, and he was talking about just being, I think, a little bit frustrated with the work that he was doing.
Right.
And wanting to make films. And him just talking ideas, they're talking scripts, they're talking concepts. Then I went off to England to go to drama school. While I was there, this happened.
Right.
You know, two things happened. I mean, one was Prithvi Theatre started being built, and Junoon happened.
Wow.
And it, for me, I mean, at that point I could totally understand it because Mum was always just, it was her, she was genuinely very interested in that whole period of history in India.
Right.
The whole colonial period, particularly the 1857. House was full of books, it was before that, about the mutiny and about the British in India at the time and the culture and the languages and the food. Cooking books, I mean, you know, instruction books telling the British how to run a household in 1952. You know, I mean, we had books like that in the house. So it made a lot of sense. And that was the first film, and they had a great time. I was lucky enough to get, I think it was the Easter holidays I had from drama school, and I managed to actually get to Lucknow for the last 1 week of shooting. Post that, when the film was made, I lived in London at the time, and it became my job. Dad would call up from London, from Bombay, and I would have to take these 15 cans of film around London and into preview theaters to show it to people,
Okay.
you know, to get a release there.
Okay.
And it's not easy. One person carrying 15 cans, you know, alone, and, you know, using public transport. It's a weight, it's an
Really?
bloody difficult size
Right.
thing, you know, in a trunk. I mean, how do you
Right.
do it? And so, I mean, I was very happy about it, but I had to do it. And that was my first thing was, we screened it at Academy. There was
Wow.
a cinema on Oxford Street called the Academy that was run by two Jewish brothers who introduced people like Fellini and Ray to the English market.
Wow.
You could not, like our cinemas today, you could not hire it and show your film.
Sure.
They selected it and curated it, and they invited your film. And one of them, the brothers, was an editor. So very often he would edit the films because they were sure that the English market had an appetite for a certain length. And of course, Junoon was about 2.5 hours, I think. And they agreed to screen it. They loved the film. And he said, but it's too long, we'll have to cut it.
Ah.
And then a week or 10 days later, he came back and he said, I can't cut it. I can't
Wow.
cut it. If I cut it, I'll ruin the atmosphere.
Wow.
The whole thing about it is the atmosphere, the mood that this film creates. So they released it as is,
Wow.
you know,
Incredible.
in the Academy. And
Well done, sir.
it was, that was amazing. And
Because
then
it
now
seems-
we've
sorry.
been going through this restoration process.
Right.
You know, I mean,
With the movie, with Junoon.
yeah, because a few years ago we discovered that, well, I discovered that all Dad's negatives were in a terrible state. So spoke to Karan and Sanjana, and we agreed that they had to be restored, though nobody was willing to buy them. There's no network is willing to buy the films, you know, at the moment in the market. But we,
At the moment.
At the moment.
Yes.
but we very strongly did believe that, you know, they had to be preserved. They couldn't be
Sure.
allowed to just disintegrate. Vinegar syndrome had already set in. So we started this process of identifying where, how, what. And Junoon is the first one. It's not ready. I mean, I think visually it's almost there. The restoration, the cleanup has been done. The audio hasn't. Audio, what we're going to hear today is probably just like, I'd say 30% down, a little bit of cleanup has had, but a lot of work has to be done. Because we don't have any of the tracks. We don't have anything. All we had was a negative and negative sound. And we're trying to preserve it and keep it going. So this is actually the first screening of the film post the visual restoration, and the sound is still in the process.
Wow,
so it's not
that's
perfect.
incredible.
It's not perfect. It's not.
What he's also trying to say is that the movie is going to only be better than this very soon.
What is also interesting though about Junoon at the time, Dad was, I mean, never a good businessman. And
That
he was a
helped.
producer in terms of those films, that he put the money together and he made the films, and he made those films and he let them make it the way the directors, the way that they wanted to. I mean, Shyam already had a string of films under his belt,
Right.
but Aparna and, you know, had never made a film.
And what a film that
And
was. Yeah.
you know, and he said yes, and he put money into it, and you know, they didn't cut back. But Junoon, particularly, was the more expensive of the lot. And in spite of Dad, okay, as a businessman, I know for a fact that Dad released Bobby in the Delhi UP
Wow.
thing, and made no money out of it.
Really?
Yeah, that's the kind of person he was in.
Awesome.
I mean, Mere Naam Joker had flopped. There were no buyers for Bobby. Dad had just set up a distribution company, he thought. So he actually bought Bobby at a good price because he was supporting his brother, and released that. Delhi UP territory, it was the biggest territory, and Bobby.
And he lost money on Bobby.
They didn't lose money, he didn't make a rupee. I mean, they didn't make anything. You know, nothing.
Who were the exhibitors? In which mansions do they live?
It was a success.
But I never used it. But Junoon, I do know that he covered the money on Junoon.
Awesome.
So
That's-
in
that was the next question
in that
I wanted
time,
to ask.
in '79, when it was hardcore commercial, you know, cinema, there were no multiplexes. You know, the Junoon was where was Metro? Was it in Bombay or was it Regal?
It opened in some of the largest cinemas in the country.
Yes.
You know, and it still made. I mean, it broke even. Had he been a good businessman, he probably would have made a huge profit out of it. You know, but being him, he actually managed to just cover costs.
But Junoon was memorable for me for two reasons. One was I got to act with Mr. Jeffrey Kendall, who has been my idol since I was maybe 6 or 7 years old. And as I've written in my book, I waited 20 years for that moment, and it was over in a few seconds. All I had to do was walk up to him and cut him down with a sword. After waiting to act with him for 20 years. And the second reason why it was memorable was because I did not have to share a room with Kulbhushan Kharbanda. For the first time, earlier in all of Shyam's locations, Kulbhushan and I were in the same room, and he would snore his head off all through the night.
Listening to them made me want to go back and revisit the film. I hope it does the same for you.
Subscribe to Film Companion to get your film fix.